Onions are great, but shallots are a superior bulb altogether. They taste better, store for way longer, and are easier to grow too. In fact, they're very much the smart gardener's bulb of choice. Today I'm going to plant two types of shallots, these traditional round shallots here, and then these torpedo-shaped banana shallots, which are in fact a cross between a shallot and an onion. I especially love the banana shallots because they're easier to top, tail and peel, but both types have bags of flavour, so I reckon it's worth growing both. The really exciting thing about growing shallots is that each of these bulbs or sets will grow on to produce between 3 and 10 new bulbs. How cool's that? And you can save some of those bulbs to put aside and replant for the following season, keeping the cycle going and saving you some pennies. The varieties I'm planting today are all cold tolerant, which makes them ideal for planting in the autumn or indeed into the early winter. This is important because if I was to plant a spring planting variety of shallot now, there's a good chance the plants would just end up bolting before they've had a chance to produce a usable bulb, and we don't want that. Like their bigger bold brothers, the onions, shallots like a position in full sun and well-drained soil. Now aim for somewhere that gets at least 5 hours of direct sunshine a day. I like to prepare the soil in advance of planting by adding plenty of well-rotted organic matter, such as manure or compost. I mentioned well drained, and that is important because we don't want moisture to kind of sit around the bulb and potentially cause it to rot. And drainage is really important at this kind of wetter time of year. So I like to, as I say, improve my soil by regular additions of organic matter. This will build soil structure and that will help it to drain through better in times of really wet weather, but also hold on to moisture during the summer when our plants really need it. I also find that growing in raised beds really helps with drainage, especially with my clay soil, and boy has it been wet here recently. Now, if your soil gets completely saturated, then just wait off planting until spring using a spring planted variety, or plant your shallots into pots, and more on that in a bit. As each bulb will multiply into a clump of bulbs, I need to make sure that I'm leaving enough space between them to enable them to do that, to give them enough space. So I'm going for about sort of 6 inches or 15 centimetres apart in both directions. Now, if you are after the very largest bulbs, you might want to space them a tad further apart than that, say 10 inches or 25 centimetres, but I think this will give a good balance of yield versus space taken up. Now, I absolutely love onions, but one of the real strengths of shallots is that you get many more bulbs in the same area that you have. So it's a great way of really ramping up the yield for the space you have. Yes, she's a good girl. Let's pop you down, darling. Right, I'm pretty happy with that spacing there. Got just the right number for the bed as well. That's handy. So now to get on and plant them. And the way to do that is simply to bury the bulb so that just the very, very tip there is showing, just proud like that. Use your finger, pop him in it goes like that. Now what will happen, these shallots will not do much above ground over winter, but what they will be doing is forming roots below ground. And then at the first hint of warmth in spring, they'll start shooting and really growing away. And that's really it. If it's dry, of course, finish off by giving these a bit of a water in. This is quite damp stuff. This is quite claggy, in fact, but I know this will drain through nicely in the sunshine and breeze today. But what if your soil is completely saturated? Well, you could wait until spring, but another option is to plant your sets into pots or good-sized plug trays like this. Get your plug trays filled with an all-purpose potting mix, and then just get your little set on top and give it a little twist as you push down. That helps settle it into position. There we are, just finishing with a little top up of my potting mix. And then once you're done, just give it all a good tap like that to settle it all around like that. Just drop it like that, drop it like a tart. Okay, now let's just give them a water to set them on their way. I find starting shallots off this way means they grow really quickly indeed. You'll need to keep them watered if the potting mix does dry out, but then they can go outside as soon as the soil is workable at the same spacings as our direct planted shallots. Having ready to go pots or plug trays of young plants is a really satisfying way to get an immediate shock of green out there in the vegetable garden first thing in spring. One moment it's bare ground, the next a fine army of upright alliums are proudly standing to attention. Lovely stuff. Sets aren't the only way to start shallots. They'll grow really well from seeds as well, and seeds offer a few advantages over sets. They're obviously a lot cheaper and they carry much less risk of having disease on them, which you can sometimes get from sets from less reputable suppliers. Another advantage of starting from seed is if you are in lower latitudes. That's because shallots are what's called a long day plant. They grow best in longer days. Now sets are already a year old, so when you replant them at lower latitudes, it can kind of confuse them. Seeds, on the other hand, produce their entire life cycle in one growing season, which means they perform much better at these lower latitudes. Shallots, just like onions, which you can see here, are one of the very, very earliest things you can sow, from late winter to early spring, giving you a nice kind of feeling of getting on with the growing season. Now, each seed will produce just one bulb, but you can sow them in a cluster of seeds to get a cluster of seedlings to grow on as if you planted a set. So I've got my sieved or screened potting mix here, just an all-purpose one, and I've made little depressions with my fingers and now sowing. And what I'm going to do is just drop in between 5 and 6 seeds per plug like that, and then I'll just cover them over and give them a water to get them started. Now shallots germinate best at temperatures above about 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. So to get this lot to sprout reliably, I'm just going to move them indoors to germinate inside, and then once they are up, I'll bring them back out here. And they will stay in this relatively protected environment until mid-spring, when I'll plant them out at their final spacings, the same as I planted those sets. And I will be aiming to get them outside once most nights are above freezing and it's just that little bit warmer. Now here's the really fab thing about shallots. Once they are planted, they need very little care. The main job is in the growing season just to keep them well watered as they grow once the soil dries out, and do check with your finger, popping it in the soil to check for moistness before you water. The other thing is to keep them well weeded. Now because they have thin strappy leaves, any big weeds can easily outcompete and block out the sunlight, so be sure to go through and weed them, lifting the weeds by hand to avoid damaging the delicate near surface roots. An optional treat for your shallots is to feed them in early spring with a nitrogen-rich fertiliser. Now, as an organic gardener, I prefer to use something natural, so I go for something like pelleted chicken manure. Just sprinkle them next to your plants and tickle them into the surface with a hand fork. Now, this will both boost growth and reduce the risk of plants bolting. I also like to apply a mulch during the summer to keep the soil cooler, lock in soil moisture and reduce opportunities for weeds. Now you could use garden compost for this, but I like to apply regular but thin layers of grass clippings because I often have those to hand precisely when I need them. If you do find plants bolting or flowering for any reason, then just cut off the flower stalk so that the plant concentrates all of its energy into bulb formation. Then use up those bulbs first of all because they won't store as well. Gorgeous gourmet shallots are ready to harvest when the leaves start to collapse by going yellow or brown. Now this will generally be a few weeks after the summer solstice, but usually before your main crop onions are ready. Get a fork in beneath the bulbs so you can hoik them up and out. Now I like to do this on a dry day so I can leave them on the surface for a couple of hours to dry off a bit before gathering them up and bring them inside into an airy, shaded spot to continue drying for the next 2 weeks. Once they are fully cured, you can then bag them up into netted sacks to hang them up for storage, and that should be in a cool, dry, well ventilated place. Now this is perhaps the greatest thing about shallots. They store for so long. Well kept, they'll store for anywhere up to 10 months, which means you need never be without this gourmet bulb. Now let me assure you the flavour of homegrown shallots is par none. My favourite way to enjoy them is finely minced and added into salad dressings. Sublime. What's your favourite way to enjoy them? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks Shallot for watching this video all the way to the end, and I do hope you are inspired to give this gourmet bulb a try. I'll catch you next time.